Hey, I'm Lynn.
And I'm Amanda. Welcome to the Pursuit of Badasserie, the podcast. Today we're talking about hitting a wall, what to do, how to get out of it, where you go from here. So whether it's in business and creativity and your personal growth, we know it's frustrating and there's always an opportunity for growth. So let's get after it.
Always. Absolutely. So, how many of you have hit a wall before? Like face planted, super hard, black eyes, bloody nose. Not a real wall, but I have run into my fair share
I
of
have
like,
run into actual walls. It instantly reminded me of smack down into a very
yeah.
clean door.
But the figurative wall, it could feel like a real wall. But the first thing, Amanda and I had a nice conversation around this. And actually, we really saw this in real time play over the last few weeks with our 6 days, with our own selves, but more externally because we're doing all of these events and different things. And we're watching individuals, how they engage, react, respond, participate, or not when they're hitting a wall. So the first thing that we would suggest for you to do is it really a wall? Like, is it a wall or a problem like you're making much bigger than what it needs to be? Is it like not really a wall, but it's in your head type of thing? Is it because you're lacking something? Like, really, what is the wall? Recognizing it for what it is and really being clear about, I'm just exhausted and I can't go any further, or this problem is just too big for me to understand, whatever it is, but really not taking it for the superficial kind of initial, like whatever, but digging a little bit deeper. And is it truly a wall?
Yeah, it's about stepping back and sort of assessing the situation. So you need to pause, analyze what this block is, because ultimately, when you're feeling that resistance, is this that you're burned out? Is it that you're missing resources? Is it that you're stuck in perfectionism? Is it that you just need clarity to move forward? Is it that you're sinking into kind of your go-to emotion or your go-to fallback feelings and actions? Because a lot of times it's just habit that's making you feel like you're hitting a wall, and it's not actually that there is a wall there. It's just that you're so used to hitting walls that you think it's there when really it's just like a window you got to crack open a little bit. It's really important to reflect and analyze what's causing this. Why do you feel like it's there? And then a lot of it's about shifting your perspective. I think there's a million ways to look at everything. There's a million angles for every single problem. There's a million solutions for every single problem. So can you approach things with fresh eyes? Like Lynn said, is it really a wall? Or do you just need an alternative solution, like brainstorm other ideas? Are you not putting yourself in the other person's shoes? There's so many different angles to look at it, but ultimately, if you're not taking a moment to analyze, step back, look at it, and see it from another perspective, you might be hitting that wall for the rest of your life.
Yeah, yeah. I chuckled because a vision came in my head when you were talking. And I think because I'm in Thailand, like this is the example that comes to mind. But you see these experiments that are done where they might chain an elephant's leg. And so the elephant can only go for so far, right? And they do this for so much time. And then they take the chain off. Well, then the elephant has this make believe barrier that it can't go through because it's been chained to it. And we create walls like that all the time because we continue to get into that same pattern and routine. And yeah, I was like, going off of what Amanda said is, that assessment, stepping back, you cannot solve problems in panic mode. Action does. And there is an aspect of like some people work really well under pressure and able to like put that action into place. But if you're in panic mode, if you are totally in your emotions, it's hard to not react. You need to be in a responding mindset. You need to be in an action mindset of how to get around, get over, get through, get under, whatever that is. But essentially, and then figure out how to avoid it. But we'll get to that in a second. You cannot be in that emotional state. So taking that step back, taking those deep breaths, getting out of panic mode or that emotions, stop spiraling, right? So a lot of people spiral and then they make a mountain out of a
Mountain
molehill.
out of a molehill.
Yeah. And this might be you. And I've been here. I'm sure Amanda's been here where you're so down the damn rabbit hole that you forget what the actual problem is that you're freaking out about. And so that's why it's so important to just like step back to really see what is in your way and how to best move forward.
Yes. And I think along with that, along with like that stepping back, taking a break from it, comes simplifying and prioritizing. And I know it's no shock that Lynn and I talk about prioritization. We talk about it all the time. But all that overwhelm that you're feeling leads to stagnation. So it's that analysis paralysis where you can't go any further. So if you can break the problem down into smaller, manageable steps and then tackle them one by one, you're going to get much further and really focus on those impactful actions than if you just sort of spiral out of control. Everything's this huge problem and everything has to be done immediately. And oh my God, this. And I'm kind of chuckling to myself because I have a couple of clients who fall into that category of every time they talk to me, it's like the shit has hit the fan. Like every week there's drama in their business and so from HR. And then this came down and I have this meeting that came up and I don't have time for this and I'm so busy for that. And you just like take a breath. Not everything is an emergency. And you're so stuck in all the emergency mode, the panic mode, that you're not actually getting anything done. And then a week has passed and then you are in panic mode because you didn't do anything for a full week because you were too busy panicking about everything that wasn't a big deal to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that seems a little bit callous on my part to say it, but there are a lot of things that we as a society, as people romanticize and like over dramatize when it's really not that big a deal. If it doesn't matter in 5 years, then does it really matter? Like that's Cher's words of wisdom, not mine. But if it's not important in 5 years, it's probably not important now. So you don't need to freak out every time the power goes out or, you know, so-and-so shows up late for work or your car got towed. Like things happen and they suck. Yeah. And now what? Because if you sit in that shit, everything's going to smell like shit and you're going to stop noticing that that's what the smell is. You're just going to be like, this is the way everything smells.
Yeah.
And that's not how it's going to be. That's not how it's going to be productive for you.
Not at all. You need to step out and step into strategy as well, like having a strategy of how you're going to do those action steps. You know, I was thinking when you were talking about a lot of this comes from lack of emotional intelligence, unhealed trauma. It is a response, a reactive kind of mode. It's the way we deal with things. Like I know we want to talk a little bit about freeze, flight, fight, and fawn. And so how we respond, but it could be unhealed trauma, lack of emotional intelligence, instability in our lack of grounding of ourselves. Like there's a lot of reasons why we tend to react and not super scarcity, super defensive, super reactive kind of mode and complaining about everything. That's kind of a whole other layer of it. But yeah. And again, if you continue to keep living in that, just like the elephant, like that's going to be the wall. And eventually that wall fortifies itself. It becomes harder and harder to like get through it because you've ingrained that so much in your brain and in your mechanisms. But let's talk a little bit about freeze, fight, flight, or fawn, because we see a lot of people when they're dealing with hitting that wall, how they initially react.
You know, we've seen this a lot in group trainings that we've done, in one-on-ones that we've done, but ultimately not ultimately, generally speaking, this is a generalization, people tend to gravitate towards one. Like if you're faced with a saber-toothed tiger, like, are you going to try to fight the tiger? You can try to run away from the tiger. You're just going to like lay back. Like these are internalized things that they're just naturally part of us. If you want to call it nature versus nurture, there's all sorts of, you know, go ahead and go to a psychology class, go read the psychology behind this. But ultimately you will tend to fall towards one or the other. And it's basically just a panic response, like your automatic response of freezing up when you get that anxiety or when you're feeling like you're hitting a wall, you just freeze and do nothing, or you're running away from the problems, or you're fighting the problems and constantly pushing back. There's something that you're going to naturally fall into. Curious if you know what you naturally fall into, but we noticed it a lot with our clients. And even when they say they don't do it and they're like, no, I never run from a fight. I never run from a fight. And then like the first time something gets hard, they're like beelining it to the parking lot, wrong or right, and we're not poo-pooing you for running away if you need to. And there is one that you're going to gravitate towards.
Yeah. Do you know what yours is? Should we talk about ours? I was actually, I kind of know I'm two of them. We don't have to talk. We'll talk offline. If you want to know what ours is, send us a message.
Yeah, send us a message, then we'll talk.
Listen, it is so important to understand where you are at with that. Absolutely. I think there's also an aspect of learning to build resilience before you need it, right? Understanding that we're all going to go through shit, and that failing forward almost aspect, that resilience kind of fiber will help you adapt when you're hitting the wall. The walls are going to come. Either other people are going to put them in front of us. We naturally put them in front of ourselves. even if we're the most grounded, healed, emotionally intelligent, thought leader, blah, 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 we're still human. And so they're there for a reason. First of all, understand what our natural ones are, what our go-to walls are. Learn what they look like before they happen. So that way we can put strategy in place to kind of help us. And that might be, I know that I hit a wall and I check out doing my social media because I hate it, or my email sequences because I hate them. And so maybe I'm doing a work with a bunch of my buddies, right, to get this done. So that way I'm in a safe space. I'm also with other people, whatever that is for you, but setting up things to help you to succeed before you need them, because you understand what your walls are, because these walls tend to be the same walls over and over again. So once you recognize them, once you start to learn how to get around, over, under them, through them even, then how do you prevent them? How do you mitigate them? And I think that that also, again, is where that strategy comes into play. Like really kind of looking at big picture and say, I know I tend to act this way. My stress response is this. And so I need X to be able to make sure that I'm not sitting in the shit and smelling like it. Oh, I love that phrase.
Well, I mean, we mentioned this, that the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, that's like a tongue twister. These are natural reactions. This is just rooted in your nervous system. We're not saying that you can completely avoid these things or that they're inherently bad, because these are the things that kept you alive when you were fighting saber-toothed tigers back in the olden days. So these aren't bad. This is just how your body navigates and handles conflict. It handles stress, handles challenges, difficult situations. And these are kind of your go-tos. And, you know, we talked about what ours are, sort of elusively talked about ours. However, it's different in different situations. So certain things, I'm going to have a different response. And depending on who's around me, like my response to conflict or to a challenge, but I'm by myself, is different than if I'm in a group of people who are less or more capable than me. So if I'm with my son, my fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response is going to be different in a dangerous situation than if I'm by myself. And that's pretty much obvious based on how I've traveled over as a 20-year-old versus how I travel with my son now. Like 20-year-old Amanda was much less careful than 40-something-year-old Amanda. But just to kind of give a breakdown of what this looks like. So your fight response, this is why you're facing things head on. This can look like confrontation or aggression, anger, defensiveness. And aggression doesn't necessarily mean like you're going to throw punches, like you're not throw punching people left and right every day. It could also just be verbal diarrhea, like needing to win an argument just for the sake of winning the argument, pushing back constantly. Why are you chuckling over there? Why are you chuckling? But this is like if you're feeling overwhelmed at work and you feel the need to like argue with a coworker just for the sake of arguing, like you're needing to take control of a project, that's sort of your fight response. So now your flight is escaping threats, like you're running away from the saber-toothed tiger. This is avoidance. This is excessive busyness, anxiety, overworking, physically leaving a situation, like getting up and leaving because you're too overwhelmed, you're uncomfortable. This is also procrastination, distraction, but this is the busyness. So instead of dealing with a difficult conversation, like you're suddenly too busy to deal with that conversation, or you suddenly need to leave the room to deal with that conversation. Like I can't handle this right now. And so you walk away from the conversation. That's avoiding that confrontation. That's an example of flight. Freeze is shutting down and paralysis. So this is like zoning out, feeling stuck, disassociation. Yeah, if you're having a difficulty making decisions or you're shutting down emotionally, you're feeling numb. That's what the freeze feels like. And this is like
overwhelm. I think there's a lot of feeling of overwhelm and freeze as well.
For sure. Like when you have to make a tough decision at work or with personal life and you're feeling like paralyzed, so you just do nothing. This is a lot of analysis paralysis for sure.
Definitely.
Like you kind of hope the problem will just kind of fix itself. Like, oh, if I ignore it, it'll just kind of fix itself and I won't have to do anything. And then the last one is fawn, which is your people pleasing. So you're people pleasing to survive, which sometimes it is a survival mechanism. Like you people please for survival. That is an absolute thing. And all of these are real things and real dangerous situations. We're not just talking on a superficial level. These are real things. Fawn is apologizing, like over apologizing, prioritizing everybody else over yourself, being overly accommodating. Yeah, pleasing instead of solving, like no boundary setting at all. You're always seeking approval. You're seeking outside approval. So instead of like standing on your own ground and demanding, like putting down a policy, like and adhering to a policy in your business, for example, they want a cheaper rate or they want a discount or they want a refund that's against your policy, then you go the extra mile to make them happy, even if it's against policy and it's against what financially you can afford. You go bend over backwards to them happy. So that's like a breakdown of what each of
Yeah,
those are. And these show up differently in different situations.
they do. And I'm glad that you said that, because not only do they show up differently, but they are natural in us. We all have them. And there's almost like a light side, if you would, and a dark side. So it can be in spite of, also in favor of. It is our natural pattern. It's the way we handle challenges, conflicts, high level or high stakes decisions. Like these four, they're ingrained in us. And I think Amanda said this earlier, is most of these are our go-to or go-tos. Sometimes we embody multiple. They are formed typically from childhood, early survival kind of mechanisms, right? That's where we kind of learn our boundaries and our go-to. But when we can recognize them, when we understand what our go-to behavior is, it will help us be more empowered to respond versus react. And we shift ourselves into more of a conscious state versus a reactive state. Why it's important and why we brought this up of how to adapt when you're hitting a wall is you have to understand your natural go-to mechanisms. Otherwise, you're always going to be held in that pattern.
Yeah, it's how you develop coping mechanisms, like healthy coping mechanisms. If you can identify what it is and your triggers and when you're sort of getting stuck and you're hitting a wall and why you're hitting that wall, then it's much easier to come out of it if you can recognize it. If you're just throwing spaghetti on the wall, hoping that something hits, like some coping mechanism hits, it's going to take a lot longer than just knowing the answer and doing that one thing. Again, we're just trying to simplify and make it easier for you to take care of yourself, because mental and physical burnout, which is basically what hitting a wall is, it can be that big culprit. You've got to prioritize the other things in your life. And sometimes that means the healthy coping mechanisms that you have to use in order to get over that thing, whatever it is. And again, this is life. Nobody's perfect. Nobody avoids these things. And you want to have these things. So we don't want to make it sound like these are bad things, because again, this is what kept you alive when you were being, like when you're walking down a creepy alley and you sense something. This is that part of your nervous system kicking in to keep you alive. This is the fight of the saber-toothed tiger. This has kept us alive for thousands of years. So we're not fighting it or denying that it exists or denying its usefulness. However, when we're hitting a wall, there's often a reason behind it. And these are kind of the culprits.
Yeah.
Also.
So now you know what your wall is. Now you understand kind of your patterns leading up to it, how you respond or react, the strategy behind getting around with it. Two other things to add is, in order to get a different result, you have to do things differently. So change it up, figure out how to change things up, test a different approach, and start with small steps. Action is important. You get clarity in the action. Don't overthink it. Just do. Also, having some kind of route to the why. And we talked a lot about this. I remember coming back to this several times over the past few weeks. It is the shit that you're sitting in more important than the freedom of not being in that. So on this side of the wall or this side of the wall, which one drives you more? And understanding the why or the root behind that, it could help be a driving force for you to get over, get around, get under, get through it, and create new patterns and new strategies to either avoid or minimize, mitigate them as you approach them, because they're going to happen.
They're going to happen. And you're talking about the hitting that same wall over and over again. And I kept thinking, like, if you keep hitting these same walls, you're actually really building another brick. So
yeah,
every time you hit that wall at the same time, you're just putting another brick down. So you have to literally go through multiple walls that are the same wall, because you've built so much of that up in your psyche and your habits and your processes. If you notice that wall forming, like, nip it in the bud early, because the last thing you want is to have to take 4 times as long to break through that wall. So embrace the challenge of it. We want to experiment with things. It's like the golden word of 2020 to 2025, the pivot. We want to pivot. We want to embrace the challenges, because that's part of the journey. That's part of what we're doing. It's part of what makes us stronger and smarter and more resilient and more interesting and have better senses of humor. So we want to have a little bit of that tenacity, and you've got to go for it, and you've got to actually put in the work to break down the walls, because it's really easy to keep putting the bricks down, building, but it actually sometimes takes more work to bring them down.
Yeah. All right. We're at time. If this podcast resonated with you, go ahead and share it with somebody who you know that needs to hear about adapting and getting over or under or through those walls and setting themselves up for more success. Also, hit subscribe to our newsletter, hear all the cool things that are coming out. Let us know what other topics that you want to hear about, so that way we can add them, because all these topics came from some of you, our listeners, and we're really excited to be able to give you the content that you want.
That's right. So until next time, get after it.
All right, everyone, it's not enough to just listen.
Now you've got to put it into action.
We are so excited to see what you do next.
If you enjoyed our show, please leave us a review on iTunes.
And to find out more about what we're doing, visit us at thepursuitofbadasserie.com.